In our last session, we started with a meditation that was meant to center ourselves. Once we find the center within that grounds us in eternal peace, we can project this peace out into the world. Little by little, the outer world becomes a reflection of our inner state. This is what is truly happening when we create lasting change. This is also the secret of true power. What do we do when so much is coming at us so fast we can hardly recover ourselves? We resort to nonviolence. So let me explain. German-American philosopher Hannah Arendt observed that power and violence are opposites. Nonviolence, therefore, far from being utopian, toothless, or impractical against human brutality, is one of the most powerful tools we have. In fact, a closer reading of history reveals that nonviolence is neither passive nor naive, but is one of humanity's most powerful resources for ending oppression and building more just societies. From ancient religious traditions to contemporary struggles for democracy, nonviolence has consistently demonstrated its transformative potential. The task today is therefore to recognize its underlying principles, to make its successes visible, and to extend its reach into the heart of global consciousness. At the core of nonviolence lies a shift in paradigms. Traditional approaches to violence, so-called law and order or coercive security, presume that violence can be controlled by more violence. However, we know from public health studies that prevention is far more effective. Nonviolence simply requires us to take the next logical step, to recognize that violence is not inevitable and that human dignity and solidarity can counter cycles of destruction. Leader of Indian independence movement, Mohandas Gandhi, had the notion of satyagraha, or holding firmly to truth, as the core principle of nonviolent struggle. In other words, it is not merely passivity, but a disciplined act of choosing courage, creativity, and justice. All major religious traditions have developed an ethics of compassion and restraint. Figures from Mahavira to Jesus, from Muhammad to Lao Tzu, called followers to meet hatred with mercy. This does not mean acquiescence. American philosopher Henry David Thoreau's writings on civil disobedience shaped the approaches of Leo Tolstoy, Gandhi, and eventually Martin Luther King Jr. The record is far from abstract. From the withdrawal of the Roman plebeians in the 5th century BCE to the glorious revolution of 1688, nonviolent actions have repeatedly changed political destinies. Gandhi's Salt March of 1930 epitomized the symbolic and practical power of disciplined defiance, leading to India's independence and inspiring anti-colonial struggles throughout the world. In the modern era, the U.S. civil rights movement stands as a beacon of sustained nonviolence action. Rosa Parks, King, and Septima Clark mobilized grassroots courage to dismantle segregation, winning landmark legislation, and reshaping the national conscience. Nonviolence also fueled global democratic transitions, Solidarity movement in Poland, the revolutions of 1989 across Eastern Europe, South Africa's defeat of apartheid through mass mobilization and truth commissions, and the women-led movement in Liberia that ended a civil war. Empirical studies confirm that between 1900 and 2006, nonviolent movements were twice as likely to succeed as violent ones, and more likely to produce durable democratic institutions. Despite this record, the paradigm of violence continues to obscure nonviolence from public view. Violent episodes, dramatic in their immediacy, are easier to quote-unquote see and thus dominate historical narratives. Nonviolent victories, quieter but more enduring, are often overlooked. Critics argue that nonviolence is passive, ineffective, or denies the right to self-defense. And yet, such critiques presuppose a narrow, one-dimensional concept of power, which is not true. As Arendt argued, power and violence are not only opposites, but violence destroys power, while nonviolence builds it by mobilizing legitimacy and mass participation. The deeper truth is that nonviolence requires extraordinary discipline. Gandhi compared its training to military preparation. An Indian poet, Krishnala Sridharani, noted that nonviolent action resembles war, only with psychological, social, and economic weapons instead of physical ones. The principles of nonviolence are therefore rooted not in weakness, but in strength. Gandhi insisted that nonviolence requires self-purification, and King emphasized the choice between creative altruism and destructive selfishness, declaring that only love can drive out hate. Founder of the Albert Einstein Institution, Gene Sharp, codified nonviolence as a strategic technique of power, tested even under authoritarian regimes. What appears to be quote-unquote inaction is, in fact, a radical departure from business as usual, one that redefines the terrain of struggle. Applications of nonviolence are diverse and adaptive. Protest raises awareness through speeches, marches, art, and assemblies. Non-cooperation withdraws legitimacy from unjust systems through strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience. Nonviolent intervention disrupts oppressive policies through occupations, blockades, and hunger strikes. Constructive programming builds alternatives, such as cooperatives, schools, and mutual aid that prefigure just societies and what they will look like. Voluntary association can generate spontaneous new institutions, as seen in Poland's Solidarity or the early American Revolution. Each method draws strength from imagination, courage, and mass participation, not coercion. Czech writer and statesman Václav Havel spoke of the power of the powerless, which is rooted in dignity rather than domination. The conclusion is clear. Nonviolence is not passive withdrawal, but the most active, effective force for human survival. It demonstrates that violence is not inevitable. Rather, it relies on imagination, institutions, and belief. To dismantle it, we must foster new imagination, new institutions, and beliefs grounded in oneness. Nonviolence is not merely a set of tactics, but a change of consciousness, a movement from reaching against destruction to cultivating a constructive life force. As Dutch rationalist Baruch Spinoza observed 4 centuries ago, peace is not an absence of war, but a virtue, a state of justice and benevolence. Our challenge today is to adopt this truth in ourselves and to spread it widely enough to transform a culture of violence into a culture of peace. This requires education that transmits nonviolent history, policies that prioritize prevention over militarization, and movements that embody solidarity across borders. As scholars of nonviolence argue, civil resistance remains the most reliable path to democracy in the 21st century. Linking nonviolence with ecological sustainability, trauma healing, and global solidarity will be critical in these struggles. Nonviolence has toppled empires, transformed nations, and built durable justice. We have seen this over and over throughout history. The evidence of conscience is equally strong. Only by refusing to destroy can humanity affirm life. To choose nonviolence is not to dream idly of utopia, but to seize upon the most powerful and practical force yet discovered for human flourishing. The future, if it is to exist at all, will depend on our capacity to harness this potential.